Hello and welcome to the British Food History Podcast. My name is Neil Buttery, food historian and chef. It's time for the traditional end-of-season Postbag episode, the 6th one, where I attempt, anyway, to answer your questions, read out your comments, and mull over your queries. I'll be disappearing for a couple of months, unless, of course, you are a monthly subscriber, where there will be a bonus episode coming up for you to listen to on the Secret Podcast in a week or so. More about that later. I've really tried to shake things up a teeny bit anyway with this 9th season. I've wanted to include some unexpected topics, some very, very niche ones, and I want to speak to more people working in academia to see what cutting-edge research is going on. And I hope you've enjoyed listening to this 9th batch of the pod. Of course, one other thing that was different about this season is that I had a sponsor for the very first time. And so, for the last time, Season 9 of the podcast is sponsored by Fruit Pig, Britain's last remaining commercial craft producer of fresh blood black puddings. Also available are their gluten-free black puddings, a very delicious hog's pudding, and traditional haggis. And they make excellent bacon and sell some fantastic British charcuterie. Visit their website, fruitpig.co.uk, for more details of their products and journey. You can also find your local stockist and access their shop. Please support them if you can. And they kicked off the 9th season, so check out that episode if you want to hear more about them. But yeah, a big thank you to Matthew Cockin and Grant Harper of Fruit Pig for supporting the podcast, and I hope all of you listening, or at least some of you listening, managed to get hold of their delicious food. As I said right at the beginning of the 9th season, I want to forge relationships with sponsors who are producing stuff that I genuinely buy and use myself, otherwise I don't really see the point. Before I get going, I mention lots of links and reference old episodes, blog posts, all sorts, but there's no need to keep notes because everything has been captured in the show notes. Okay, let's have a look at some emails regarding previous episodes in this 9th season. Black and White Pudding with Matthew Cockin and Grant Harper. Hugh Roberts contacted me to inform me of a BBC News article entitled World Black Pudding Championship Throwers Take Aim. And it's about the annual black pudding throwing competition in Ramsbottom in Bury, Greater Manchester. Well, technically Greater Manchester, but it's Lancashire really. The article is written by Susan Haley and it's dated 14th September 2025. Here's what it says. Black pudding throwers have taken aim at Yorkshire puddings during the World Championships at a Greater Manchester pub. Hundreds of spectators watched as entrants from as far afield as Japan competed in the official black pudding throwing World Championships at the Oak Pub in the village of Ramsbottom, Bury. Contestants battled it out to see who would knock as many Yorkshire puddings off a 20-foot ledge by lobbing traditional blood sausages at them. The tradition has its roots in the Lancashire-Yorkshire rivalry and has been taking place for more than a century. But it also says here it's thought to date back to the War of the Roses, when opposing armies are said to have run out of ammunition during a battle in 1455 and then threw food at each other. Well, that last bit is absolute nonsense if you ask me. The phrase "it is thought" doing quite a lot of heavy lifting. But it's great, I love that these things happen. They're very quirky and they're also British. It's a shame about the Yorkshire bashing though. But it's alright, I'm not too hurt. Right, what's next? Derbyshire oatcakes with Mark Dawson. Sarah Bailey emailed me with the following information about, well, not Derbyshire, but Staffordshire oatcakes. This is what she wrote. Hi Neil, I popped up to Longton and Fenton this morning, the two southernmost towns of the 6 pottery towns that make up Stoke-on-Trent. She attached some images, by the way, to this email, including a street view of Linney's Oatcakes, which is on the Strand in Longton, plus an image of inside Linney's, and you can see the griddle behind the counter and the gas burners. She also sent a photograph of the menu at Linney's, which includes oatcakes, bread, pikelets, and lobby, which I had to look up because I'd never heard of it. But it's a meat and vegetable stew from the region of Staffordshire, and the name must be derived from lobscouse, the North Wales version of cowl, which was discussed in the episode Welsh Sheep and Cattle with Carwin Graves. If you've not listened to that, check it out. She got permission to take the photographs, by the way. Anyway, this is what she said. I went into Linney's Oatcakes and bought 2 cheese and tomato oatcakes. They had already been made, but went back on the griddle to be reheated and filled, a total cost of £4.20. Now that is a bargain, so that's £2.10 each. Bearing in mind there'll have been VAT added onto that, that's not a huge amount of money. So it's nice that these foods are out there and affordable for regular folk like you and I. That's the point of them after all. She also said you must have to get there early to see them being cooked. I think Linney's opens at 6 in the morning, which is fairly typical. Well, not for me. She also says that Foley's Oatcakes has a stall in the market, and there are 2 or more shops on Uttoxeter Road. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. So when Sarah sent me this email, I thought, it's just nice to see that these oatcakes, which are not really different to Derbyshire ones, are hanging on. But then I received more reconnaissance from Sarah a few days later. This is what she wrote. When I finished in Longton, I went up the road to Fenton. Annie's Oatcakes had a notice on the door saying closed Monday and Tuesday, and now also Wednesday. Now I wondered, is this 3-day closure just for personal reasons, e.g. the owner has a young family or something like that, or because they are less popular today? Sarah also sent me some photographs of some pre-packaged oatcakes as well. One packet from Box Lane in Mere, which are Sarah's family's favourites. Sarah goes on to say, I don't think they have a shop, but both the butchers in Uttoxeter sell them. The other packet that she provided was by a brand called Auntie Sarah's, and she says, I would never bought them if I'd seen the label before I'd asked for them at a bakery. You can see that they have a low percentage of oatmeal, and they are a white pappy sliced bread version of an oatcake. She's right, looking at the small print on that sticker, 15% oats, that's terrible, and there's added sugar, and there's no yeast at all chemically leavened. Auntie Sarah, we are not angry, we're just disappointed. Apparently High Lane Oatcakes is said to be Robbie Williams' favourite, but she says, I haven't spent any time walking around these towns for years, and today I found 2 very sad old towns, really down at heel, and that wasn't just because of the weather. Oatcakes are still very important in Stoke-on-Trent, but they're run by a lot of small family firms, and I wonder if the next generation will take them on. I hope I've provided something of interest for you. I shall continue to listen to your podcasts. Best wishes, Sarah. Oh, well, thank you so much for all this information, Sarah. I'm going to put the photographs that she sent on the accompanying blog post, so do have a look at those. One thing I have taken from Sarah's email and the discussion I had with Mark Dawson is that these floppy pancakes of the Midlands and South Yorkshire, what Mark called the Southern Oatcake Zone, are not just hanging on, but alive and well. Though they've had to change over the centuries. All foods have to do this to keep relevant. But I feel their existence is getting wobbly. Sarah's point that they're run by small independent families is potentially worrying. But at the same time, we don't want Warburtons or something like that making them, do they? And really making flabby white bread versions of them. So let's see how they do. James Miller contacted me about the oatcakes of the Southern Oatcake Zone. This is what he said. Neil, another fascinating discussion. However, you prefaced the episode with promise of calling out the differences between Staffordshire and Derbyshire oatcakes. Whilst this was touched on in a broad sense, there wasn't a definitive view of what the difference is. Perhaps I missed it. Yes, the question of the difference. Well, the differences are explicitly talked about in the full interview on the Secret Podcast. So if you want to hear the full interview, of course, you've got to be a monthly subscriber. But anyway, I'm going to fill you in on this particular one, folks. These things, like recipes, I suppose, are fluid in nature, so perhaps a definitive difference is hard to pin down. But for those without a view or a local bias, what's your take on the key difference? And is one easier than the other to make? It sounds like that the Derbyshire may be more naturally leavened versus a flatter Staffordshire. When Mark and I talked about it in that uncut version of the conversation, we reckon they were slight and actually probably non-existent. And I asked the question because I couldn't find a difference myself. But as James says, they have changed through the decades. Everything does. And in this case, with these oatcakes of the Southern Oatcake Zone, it's the addition of wheat flour and baking powder for easier and quicker making. The question actually turned into a brief discussion between Mark and I about how proud folk are of their regional foods and how they want to see differences even if there are none. Now, James continued a little bit, saying, "It got me thinking about American pancakes because they tend to be fluffier due to a bicarbonate raising element. I wonder what the genesis of that American raised or leavened pancake is." Great episode as ever. Really liking the series. It's inspired me to subscribe. Well, thank you very much, James, for your email, for your kind words, and for becoming a subscriber. Now, hold that thought about American pancakes because they're going to crop up again later in the episode, and I shall deal with it then. What's next? Oh yes, housekeepers and butlers with Peter Breers. Now, I received 2 communications about this episode, but I cannot for the life of me find where they are. So I do apologise that I'm not reading out your names. I'm going from memory. Please do forgive me. Now, the first one was about Peter talking about the drinks the people of the Middle Ages drank, and he mentioned that people didn't drink much water. Well, the good point was made that it is a massive misconception that people in the Middle Ages didn't drink water because it was dirty. Now, this is true, and Peter knew this, and he wasn't perpetuating a myth. We were talking about the castles, large houses, etc. of the Middle Ages, and the people didn't drink much water there. It was considered a drink of the poor. It was avoided because of social reasons, not health reasons. In fact, in the episode about subversive feasting in medieval king and commoner tales with Mark Truesdale, Mark reads out a few lines from one of the ballads where a commoner is complaining about how all the poor peasants don't get the nice bread and ale. Instead, they've got to make bread from chaff and drink water. So there's plenty of water. It was clean, but it was not represented equally in all classes of society. I should have perhaps asked Peter to clarify this at the time, but we had so much stuff to rattle through, I just went on going. So anyway, that's that sorted. I hope that's a good enough response to that query. My next contactor asked about the drinks that Peter and I were talking about and were drinking, in fact, during that interview. Now, we didn't talk about all of them in a great amount of detail, and they wanted to know more. The 2 unusual ones being Usquebaugh and Vespitro. Usquebaugh pops up in Sam Bilton's book Fool's Gold, A History of British Saffron, published by Postbag Books. There's a podcast episode about it. We didn't cover this drink in our chat, but this is what Sam writes about it. The name Usquebaugh is believed to be derived from the Gaelic Usk Bay, meaning water of life or aqua vita. It was often flavoured with licorice, fennel or aniseed, or a combination of all 3. By the 18th century, it was frequently coloured with saffron too. Many recipes use brandy as the base, but vodka is also used. And she provides a recipe which is an amalgam of several other recipes. She also says, from its appearance in domestic manuals of the time, Usquebaugh seems to have been popular both for recreational and medicinal purposes. George II's wife, Queen Caroline, was given Usquebaugh on her deathbed in 1737. And she goes on to provide a recipe, so if you have a copy of that book, check it out. It's on page 265. Now, Vespitro is more obscure, and I had to do a little bit of rooting round to find out about this one. It dates from the 18th century, and it was a drink that was meant to get you farting, or at least releasing trapped wind. It's of Italian origin, and it's a spirit, brandy, or aquavita, flavoured with various herbs and spices, depending where you look. Sometimes it's sweetened with sugar. Peter's contained mace, and I found a recipe for it using angelica seed, cinnamon and mace, and lots of lemon rinds. These are all macerated in 95% proof alcohol with some water, which is then distilled and sweetened with sugar. And the book I got it from is from 1876, and it's called How to Mix Drinks by Jerry Thomas. Link to that book in the show notes. Now, I mentioned Sam Bilton there. Somebody wrote in about the episode about Shakespearean food and drink, where Sam Bilton was my guest. And James Miller emailed me about the capons that Sam and I were talking about. A capon is a castrated male chicken, which was grown up to be very fat and plump, which makes perfect sense. You want your female chickens laying eggs and not getting impregnated by cockerels. So it's best to castrate the males, and you can eat those instead of the hens. To caponize a male chicken, you have to remove the testes. The testes in birds, unlike mammals, do not descend. So you've got to do some quite invasive surgery to remove them, and it's deemed quite cruel. Now, this is what James wrote in his email. I must correct you and Sam on capons. I produced 2 beautiful birds for Christmas last year from the Ginger Pig. They get theirs from Rungi Market in Paris with a price tag to match, FYI. I was also told there was some at the Smithfield meat auction last year. Who knew? All the best, James. Well, yeah, I mean, those capons must have absolutely cost a bomb, blimey. Okay, let me clarify about capons. It is not illegal to buy capons in the UK, but it is illegal to caponize them. Even in France, in fact, across the whole of the EU, it is highly restricted, and only in certain cases and in small numbers can they be castrated and made into capons. It's a bit like rosé veal in the UK. It's illegal to raise calves in crates in the dark here in the UK, but it's not illegal to sell traditional, i.e. low welfare, veal from the continent here. It's imported all the time. You do see some butchers and stores at farmers markets purporting to sell capons at Christmas time, but these are regular cockerels which are not castrated. Maybe some people think the word capon can apply to all male chickens. Maybe they haven't done their research properly. Maybe it's just nice because it's a nice old-fashioned traditional word. But now we all know the difference. You know what to look out for. Of course, it's up to you as to whether you think it's okay to buy capons or not. I'm not going to tell you that. Okay, we'll have a break from letters, and I'm just going to tell you about my news after the season finishes. So as I said at the top of the episode, I'm going to be disappearing for maybe 3 months, but I will be collecting more conversations ready for season 10, assuming I get recommissioned, that is. How to keep up with news whilst I'm away? Well, make sure you're on social media. Follow my blog, British Food A History. There's a little button on the sidebar of the blog where you can sign up for it. I post news and such like on there when appropriate. You could, of course, become a £3 monthly subscriber and get all of the news in one place with my newsletter. You also get first dibs on any special events. There are several other benefits though. There's the Easter eggs page, there's bonus blog posts, but most importantly, there's the secret podcast where the full interviews from season 9 can be found. There will be a bonus episode of the 9th season popping up there in a week to 10 days. Keeping Food Traditions Alive with Tom Parker Bowles, which was recorded live at the Servit Forth Food History Festival on the 18th of October 2025. Between seasons, I'm going to be uploading the Easter eggs from the website to the secret podcast so that they're easier to access. If you want to support the upkeep of the podcast and blogs financially, but £3 is a bit much, you could instead donate a one-off virtual coffee or pint. And I must say a big thank you to everyone who supported the podcast and blogs with their hard-earned cash. I've been able to use better recording programs, and I've been able to get sound engineering support from Thomas Dinas of the Delicious Legacy podcast. Of course, you don't have to part with your cash to support, just leave a review of the podcast and follow it on your favourite app. Rate it 5 stars if you possibly can, please. But honestly, the support I get from all of you about the podcast and the blogs is just fantastic. And of course, I wouldn't be doing any of this if you weren't listening, reading, cooking and interacting. Anyway, I've gone off on one. News. I have written an article about plough pudding for BBC Countryfile magazine, which will be in the January edition. I posted pics on social media of my plough pudding. It's an advanced pudding, I would say, i.e. heavy, suety and very savoury. And I loved it. There is also a new blog post out on British food history, which is my recipe. It's a bit out there. I might be pushing the envelope a little bit too much here, but it's for blood ice cream. Recipe inspired by recipes by folk like Robert May, Thomas Dawson. There's going to be my annual Christmas boozy drink recipe and some other Christmassy recipes too. I think this year I might do Nestle Road pudding. This is news just in. There will be a Serve It Forth Food History Festival Christmas special. A Christmas feast of the uncanny on the 11th of December. It'll be online again, like the main one in October. It's a much smaller affair this time, and it's going to be just £5 a ticket, plus Eventbrite booking fee. And here is what we have written. Step beyond the cosy glow of twinkling holiday lights and into a Christmas world where the shadows tell their own tales. A Christmas Feast of the Uncanny is an immersive online event that explores the eerie, strange, and deliciously dark side of Yuletide traditions through the lens of food. Join the Serve It Forth team at this live virtual gathering to discover why ghost stories are so popular at Christmas as we explore the food references in some of the lesser-known ghoulish tales from Charles Dickens. That's my bit. But also, Sam Bilton is looking at the significance of otherworldly beings like elves, witches and monsters at this time of year and their relationship to food. And Alessandra Pino will be presenting a piece on the origins of why we eat certain foods at Christmas and how some of them can be used to divine the future. A Christmas Feast of the Uncanny combines Yuletide folklore and culinary history into one atmospheric evening, perfect for those who love the murkier elements of Christmas with a touch of the weird and macabre. It would be really good if you could join us. We so much enjoyed doing the Serve It Forth festival. And we wanted to do, as we said at the end of the festival, if you were there, we wanted to do some extra smaller fun events, and this is going to be our first one. It's going to have a structure a little bit like an episode of A's for Apple, the podcast that I co-host with Alessandra Pino and Sam Bilton. And it'll be a mixture of presentations and interviews and chat, and of course, your questions from the audience. So get that in your diary. There are links, of course, in the show notes. Also, don't forget that the first 2 seasons of A's for Apple and Encyclopedia of Food and Drink, if you've not listened to it yet, there's Season A and there's Season B, and Season C will be out next year at some point as well. Now, I mentioned the word Christmas, didn't I? If anyone would like to give a gift of one of my books this Christmas and would like a signed copy, please get in contact. I have all 4 in stock at the moment. A Dark History of Sugar, Before Mrs. Beeton, Elizabeth Raffald, England's Most Influential Housekeeper, Need to Know, and The Philosophy of Puddings. Drop me an email about it. There's more details about this on the bookshop tab of my blog at britishfoodhistory.com. Anyway, let's get back to emails and comments. Let's have a look at some correspondence regarding some older episodes. First up, Cooking English Food with Nicola Aldrin, Simone Blagg and Anthea Craig. Last season, I made a trilogy of episodes about Jane Grigson's English food because it had turned 50 years old. This was the third episode where I'm discussing memories of cooking through all of Jane Grigson's recipes from that book with 3 of the people who were put through their gastronomic paces through that process. In this episode, we discussed the time I cooked eels, and it was very traumatic. The main reason being that they simply would not die. I also talked about it on the Recipes Project podcast. Well, Chloe Lewis got in contact via Blue Sky. Regarding your story about eels, a friend had to arrange a photo shoot for a cookery book with an eel. She went to Billingsgate, and once the fishmongers had found an eel, they said, "Put it in the drawer." My friend says she doesn't know what happened in the drawer, but the eel went in alive and came out dead. I mean, it's so creepy and amazing in equal measure, that, isn't it? I asked Chloe if she knew what the drawer did. Chloe replied, she didn't dare ask. We're guessing it administers an electric shock, maybe. Which, given your experience, I know now why they did it. If anyone can shed any lights on this magic Billingsgate eel killer, I would really like to know. By the way, Billingsgate Market is going to be closing in 2028, which is very sad. A topic, perhaps, I should add to my list. I'm wondering also, are there any eel-based horror films? Because there really should be. Maybe I'm the one to write it. Next up, Sam Bilton and Neil Buttery talk tripe. I received a DM from Sonia Jolly in Australia, who had listened to the special episode I did with Sam Bilton about tripe. It went out on both of our feeds. And in that episode, we spoke about the preparation and how it's a bit of a secret these days. And of course, I attempted to cook some tripe and it did not end well. It was pretty gross. Now, Sonia provided some insider information in her DM. I've never eaten tripe, but my first full-time job many years ago was in an abattoir in the offal and tripe room. I was told at the time that because the tripe was pre-cooked, that lots of old recipes didn't work as their preparation methods had changed and it never used to be pre-cooked. And if that stage had been done poorly, you couldn't get it right when cooking at home. I'm Australian, and at the time, most people that cooked tripe for some reason were quite secretive of how they cooked it, if they were good at it. Hope you've had better luck since the podcast came out. Well, this might explain why my efforts were so bad. When I tried the tripe at Chadwick's stall at Berry Market, it was fine. Pre-cooked and pretty tender. Since that episode came out, I've eaten some delicious cooked tripe at an excellent Chinese restaurant in Bath called Chili Family Noodles. I highly recommend it if you're in the Bath area. So it's certainly not all bad. I asked Sonia what it was like working there, and this is what she wrote. It was my university job over the 3-month summer holidays after my first year of university. The pay was awesome. I made more money than I did as a new graduate. I was lucky enough to go back each summer holidays. As you can imagine, the smell was rather intense. We had a rather high staff turnover in that section. Not surprised. My dad is a butcher, so I kind of knew what to expect. I didn't have to do any of the more squeamish jobs, she says. The boys in the paunch room had the worst of it. They had to clean the tripe before it was cooked, cut into pieces and make sure all the ingesta had been removed. The smell was so bad that they didn't eat, smoke or lunch with anyone else. We just took the tripe from the top section and put it in the bottom one, then packed them into bags. Most of the stuff got sold overseas. One of the cuts got packed separately, was sold for the same price as tenderloin / fillet steak. So there you go. I need to revisit cooking tripe. I will get round to it eventually. If you've got anything to add to this tripe talk, please do contact me. Cooking tips are very much welcome, but food memories, other ways of cooking it, British or otherwise, I would love to know about it. If you've got anything to add about anything from this episode for the next Postbag, please do let me know. Email me, neil@britishfoodhistory.com. Thank you very much, Sonia. Now follows a sort of special section on baking. Of course, I had my book, Need to Know, A History of Baking, out last year. I've done episodes about various baked goods. There's lots of recipes on the blog for baked goods, so I get quite a few baking-themed emails. Here is one from Lucy Alcock in Wellington, New Zealand. This is what she says. Kia ora, Neil. I just read your post on scones and it reminded me of Queen Elizabeth and drop scones. An email I received an age ago on a letters list. I'm forwarding it to you just in case you hadn't seen it and it might be of interest. Kind regards, Lucy. Kia ora, Lucy. I had not come across this. The blog post that Lucy is talking about, by the way, was a history of scones that I wrote. So I've left a link to that in the show notes for you if you want to check it out. But yeah, I'd not come across it. And if I had, it would definitely have gone into Need to Know, A History of Baking. And I love that this exists. So in 1959, President Eisenhower visited the UK and stayed at Balmoral in Scotland with the Queen, Elizabeth II. He loved the drop scones that were served up during his stay. And here is a letter written on Buckingham Palace letterheaded paper, handwritten by Queen Elizabeth II herself, dated 24th of January 1960. This is what it says. Dear Mr. President, seeing a picture of you in today's newspaper standing in front of a barbecue grilling quail reminded me that I had never sent you the recipe of the drop scones which I promised you at Balmoral. Now I hasten to do so and I hope you will find them successful. Though the quantities are for 16 people, when there are fewer, I generally put in less flour and milk, but use the other ingredients as stated. I've also tried using golden syrup or treacle instead of only sugar, and that can be very good too. I think the mixture needs a great deal of beating while making, and it shouldn't stand about too long before cooking. We have followed with intense interest and much admiration of your, and I can't tell whether this says tremendous or horrendous, but anyway, I'm going to go with tremendous. We have followed with intense interest and much admiration your tremendous journey to so many countries, but feel we shall never again be able to claim that we are being made to do too much work on our future tours. It's got quite tricky to read handwriting. Anyway, this is what she ends with. We remember with such pleasure your visit to Balmoral, and I hope the photographs will be a reminder of the very happy day you spent with us. With all good wishes to you and Mrs. Eisenhower, yours sincerely, Elizabeth R. Now, what's interesting to me here is that Queen Elizabeth didn't just have the thing copied out. She knows how to make them because she provided some extra notes. One of the things that really surprised me when I was researching for the interview that I recently did for the Serve It For Festival, where I'm talking to Tom Parker Bowles, I read Cooking in the Crown, which is a fantastic book, by the way, and I was very surprised at how much cooking the royals of the 20th and 21st century did do. Much more than you might realise. And then there's the recipe itself. I'm not going to read out the whole thing, but it's pretty much identical to the one that I use myself, which I got from the Fanny Farmer cookbook, an edition from the 1970s, which I picked up in my years in the United States. My research on these pancakes, drop scones, suggests that they were brought over to North America in the migrations of the 19th century, where they became the standard fluffy breakfast pancake on the breakfast table, eaten with butter, maple syrup, and crispy bacon. The best of all breakfasts. I've added the letter and recipe on the accompanying blog post to this episode, so please check it out. I received an email from Andrew Smith all the way from St. Louis, Missouri, USA, one of my favourite places. I lived there for a year in my sciencey days. Anyway, this is what Andrew wrote. Dear Dr. Buttery, I hope you are well. I'm writing from St. Louis with a question I hope you can help me answer. While reading my son the original Winnie the Pooh books and The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, I noticed repeated references to cakes with sugar, generally with the assumption that such a thing needed no further introduction. For instance, at one point, Owl is inviting Pooh to a party and Pooh asks, will there be those little cakes with pink sugar on them? And in the first chapter of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, Mr. Tumnus serves a cake with sugar, along with such self-explanatory items as buttered toast. I've been wondering what kind of cakes these would be and what the sugar refers to. I've so far been unable to track down a recipe or description. The internet, he says, offers various recipes inspired by these books, but they seem generally to be a product of the baker's imagination rather than any sort of research. As a historian, I find that deeply unsatisfying. Would it have been a yeasted cake or a baking powder cake? Would it have been heavily sweetened? What was the sugar icing? Was it a dusting of actual sugar? Confectioner's sugar? Granulated sugar? I would also be interested to hear any other historical context for when and how this particular cake became popular and presumably fell out of fashion. Thanks for any help you can provide, whether answering the question or pointing me to additional resources. This was a bit of an exercise in assumption making, and my assumptions were wrong, as it would turn out. I wrote back to say that I suspected that the cakes were yeasted. Both books were written at a time where the word cake could be applied just as much to either a chemically leavened sponge and a yeast-leavened cake. Things like lardy cake, hot cross buns, saffron cake. I think that they were referring to the traditional or old-fashioned yeast-leavened ones with sprinklings of sugar. The reason that I thought this was because it's a trope in children's literature to this day. For example, J.K. Rowling and Roald Dahl also mention a lot of romantic, old-fashioned foods in their books. So I reckoned a yeasted bun-style confection. The pink sugar, therefore I guess it was dyed with cochineal. And it could be iced or sprinkled, but I went for the sprinkled. It's so difficult when it comes to the descriptions of these things. The author isn't elaborating. Why would they? It would get in the way of the storytelling. So I didn't really have a definitive answer. But Andrew replied with more information. This is what he said. I've looked back through the books since receiving your reply, and I'm seeing that I could have read a tad more carefully. In Winnie the Pooh, it actually specifies that there is icing on the cakes. In one case, the icing on the little cake things is pink sugar icing, while in the other, the cake has icing and Eeyore's name in pink sugar. In The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, a closer look at the illustration reveals that Pauline Baynes interpreted the sugar-topped cake as being iced. It looks rather like a sponge cake or something similar to me, or could a yeasted cake be such a shape? Now I'm wondering if the two books might actually be referring to two different things. I like your point about children's books being deliberately old-fashioned. Do you think authors are sometimes drawing on their own nostalgia or that of adult readers rather than appealing directly to the experience of juvenile audiences? Okay, so the plot thickens. We've got two different little pink iced cakes. And the illustration is of a lovely round high dome cake with a good blob of thick water icing on top with a glacé cherry. So I was wrong about the sprinkles of sugar. That large cake with icing, it occurred to me later, could have been made with yeast or baking powder, but it also could have been made by folding in whisked egg, another way of introducing air into a batter. All of them could have made a cake made into the shape in the illustration. If you want to see the illustration, of course, it's in the accompanying blog post. But I'm really sure that authors draw on their own food memories. I remember in the Beano as a child that Plum Duff would make regular appearances, and I had no idea what it was. But I suspect the cartoonist either ate it as a child or read about them in their books as a child or something like that, because nobody eats Plum Duffs anymore. So we didn't really get to the bottom of this. If you know or have an opinion on what these cakes might be, let me know. Also, what do you think about the representation of food in children's literature? Could be another potential podcast episode in the future. Ian Harker shared a link on the British Food A History Facebook discussion group about the Denby Dale pie. This was a historic pie that was made 10 times in the town of Denby Dale. It's near Wakefield, in the West Riding of Yorkshire, God's own country. The first one was baked in 1788 to mark George III recovering from his madness. It was then decided that a celebratory pie would be made in the town for future special events. But the next one had to be larger than the previous. Ridiculous and amazing. It pops up in Need to Know. And I've mentioned it on various talks. It's one of my favourite things in all of food history. Anyway, the link Ian sent was to a BBC News article entitled, "It's like Romeo and Juliet but for pie." Yes, a play has been written about the Denby Dale pie. It's also been performed, and how sad I am that I didn't know anything about it. The article is by Grace Wood, and it's dated 17th of August 2025. I'm going to read a little bit of it, just to give you a flavour. For more than 200 years, between 1788 and 2000, the village of Denby Dale in West Yorkshire celebrated all its biggest events with a giant pie. In 1887, to celebrate Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee, the pie included beef, mutton, veal, lamb, pork, 64 rabbits, 3 hares, 42 fowls, 40 pigeons, 12 grouse, 21 ducks, 4 plovers, 1 turkey, 5 geese, 2 wild ducks, 108 small birds and 40 stone of potatoes. Now, Bryn Walker, who comes from the neighbouring village of Clayton West, and Megan Farquhar have written a play about the Denby Dale pie's history. Denby Dale is a real piece of pie history and local village history that everyone needs to know about, says Mr. Walker. In the play, Mr. Walker and Ms. Farquhar star as fantastical guardians of the pie who travel throughout time to experience the pastry behemoths. When I was younger, we'd hear about these pies. A relative might have seen 1 or 2 if you were lucky, says Mr. Walker. I got fascinated by it, by my own local history, so I started looking into it, and all the stories are so whimsical and crazy, like too good to be true. I thought this would make a really good kind of Blackadder anthology. The play, entitled The Great Pies of Denby Dale, is running for 2 nights at the Bread and Roses Theatre in Clapham, South London on the 17th and 18th of August. The pair dream of one day performing it at Denby Dale's Pie Hall, the village hall opened by the village's Pie Committee in 1972. For Mr. Walker's co-author, Ms. Farquhar from Lincoln, the tales of pie riots and tons of meat and veg have been an education. It's been really fun to learn about this through the process, she says. Well, look, I mean, this is great work. Thank you, Ian, for alerting me to this. It's so great that local social history like this is getting people creative and excited. You know, I'm going to have to add the Denby Dale pie to my list of future episodes as well, I think. Staying with the pies of Northern England, I received an email from Martin Bill about the pies of the seaside town Morecambe. And these pies were also pretty big. Morecambe, by the way, is on the northwest coast of England, and this is what he wrote. I love your podcasts. Oh, thank you very much, Martin. How I wish you still did your market stall. Rabbit and bacon and Lancashire cheese and leek pies sound amazing. Yes, I don't make pies as often as I used to, I have to say, although the Lancashire cheese and leek pie recipe is in the blog, for your information. But anyway, Martin says, as you are a local lad and know your pies and puddings inside out, I wanted to ask you if you have ever heard about something that I remember from the 1970s when we took regular family holidays in Morecambe. As kids, we found it fascinating. The youngsters today would not bat an eyelid, but as a gimmick it was great. There was a cafe on the seafront not far from where the Eric Morecambe statue is these days. Each day they would have 2 huge pies in the window. Memory tells me they were near the size of old dustbin lids, which, more than a metre, I would say, in diameter. I remember old dustbin lids. It was so popular and good fun seeing them diminish as the day progressed, strolling past. We loved eating there. It was well known at the time, and I have had contact on some Morecambe Memories websites where people do recall it. In fact, I was in the fishmongers there a few years ago, and there was an elderly relative who came out from the back who said that she used to work there. Martin goes on, I tracked it down by looking at an old photo someone posted, and it is now a charity shop. I called in and I could still sense the old counter. I'm probably making more of it than I should, but as the years pass, it very much becomes part of our food history, and I just wondered if you had ever heard of it. Well, thanks for this wonderful description, Martin. I had not come across this. Big pies are discussed in Need to Know quite a lot, and I would definitely have included these pies in there, even if it was just a little mention. It's very interesting from the point of view of the trickle-down of giant pies, once only enjoyed by the highest echelons of society. They made for the community, in the case of the Denverdale pie, and in the 20th century, everybody can enjoy them. Martin did also add this comment. I was saddened by how few people can remember the pies, and my intention was very much to try and keep the memory alive. By the way, a few people suggested the shop was on one of the side streets, but I know it's where the charity shop is now on the seafront, as it still had a lot of the visual clues, and also others have pinpointed it there. Keep up your great work, Martin. Thank you very much, Martin. It is very important to keep these memories alive. They're our history of the everyday. They're not written down in ledgers, biographies, writs, or parliamentary acts. We ourselves have got to note them. And this is why I'm always wanging on about our food memories and asking you to send them to me. They're extremely important. If you recognise these pies, or remember similar ones from places you have visited, please get in touch. It's time to go. Thank you very much for your messages and for listening, following, downloading. You know I appreciate it greatly. Don't forget to let other people know about the podcast and spread the good word whilst we're between seasons. Keep your correspondence coming. You don't have to wait for new seasons to crop up to send me interesting stuff that might appear in future Postbag editions. Apologies to anyone who's contacted me and didn't get their letter or comment read out. I had to keep this a sensible length. A huge thank you to this season's guest for sparing their time. Thank you to Matthew Cockin and Grant Harper, Jenny Linford, Chris Wakefield, Rachel Ballantyne, David Wright, Alex Bamji, Mark Dawson, Christina Wade, Paul Crane, Peter Breers, Mark Truesdale, Carwin Graves and Sam Bilton. The mixing and sound engineering was by Thomas Dinas of The Delicious Legacy. Please do check it out. But it's time to go. Thank you very much for listening, and until next time, cheerio.